Welcome to this webisode for Roche's virtual International Experience Exchange for Patient Organizations. With IEEPO 2020 having gone fully virtual this year, we have turned the content of what would have been discussed in Berlin into exciting virtual formats. Webisodes like this one have replaced the 6 original learning labs. They feature members of the IEEPO community and are available for viewing or download on IEEPO.com. They contain discussion questions and links to related resources, such as posters, submitted by patient organizations from around the world. This webisode will explore the topic of enabling effective data generation and management. And I'm really happy to welcome Nicole Boyce and Peter van Galen, who will be discussing real-world data, registries, and their role in advancing disease research and improving collaboration. Before we start, a few words about our 2 speakers, and you can of course find their full bios on IEEPO.com. Nicole Boyce founded one of the leading patient advocacy organizations for rare diseases, Global Dreams, in 2008. She is today the co-founder of RareX, supporting rare disease patients in the collection, structuring, and sharing of patient-owned data. And Peter van Galen was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, or MS, in 2006, and he is now an active member of the European Multiple Sclerosis Platform, the MS Data Alliance, and various other steering groups. Now, let's start with the first big question for today. What is the role of real-world data in closing gaps in our knowledge of MS and in improving collaborative research across all diseases? Nicole, why don't you kick us off?
Well, first of all, like you'd mentioned in MS, I mean, real-world data is what's going to help us develop and define, well, first of all, disease understanding, and future treatments, therapies, and cures, and the best type of care. So real-world data is critical across all diseases. The challenges and the barriers, I think, that exist today are what organizations, technologies, a lot of what you're doing with MS are trying to solve for.
The role of real-world data is super important in MS. People are diagnosed maybe really late in their MS journey. I was diagnosed myself at the age of 29, I think. But I can relate back to my first episodes dating back to when I was 9 years old. So it took 20 years before I was diagnosed. If real-world data was out there and would be capturing my issues that I had in the early, the diagnosis would be done way earlier. Another thing that's very important is the treatments. Normally now we have these trials, but in the trial setting, it's very secluded. You're in a hospital world. It's not the real world anymore. When people leave a trial, we lose them. We lose the patients. We don't know what's happening to them. We don't know how effective the drugs are. We don't know what their lifestyle will be like all of a sudden, how well they walk, how well their cognition is working, etc., etc. So all these things in real-world data are unfortunately not captured well enough yet. Safety, another important aspect, because we think a trial lasts 2, 3, 4 years maybe, and then we decide, it's safe, we can now use it. Yeah, EMA says so, but we don't know further down the line, 20 years time, what's going to happen. All these things are important in real-world data, and we need to use that more and more.
Peter, thank you very much. You identified some really important challenges here. Nicole, can you tell us a little bit more about these challenges around data collection in advancing research?
There are 3 main challenges that exist around data collection in advancing research. The first is, and it's pretty common across all diseases, is that data exists in silos. It exists at research institutions, it exists in biopharma, it exists in various registries within patient communities. It's hard to get, and it's siloed, and it's gated, and it's not open. The second is that data exists, but it's not in a format that is usable, what we like to call research ready. That's a huge issue because a lot of patients and patient advocates have spent a lot of time, money, and effort collecting data. And the third big challenge is that data just doesn't exist. In the world that I work in rare disease, that is a very big problem. There's 9,000 plus rare diseases, and only a small percentage have been successful in starting to collect research-ready data. So in the world of data collection, data structuring, those are some of the biggest challenges that we're facing today. And I think the purpose of our time together with Peter is to try to address those challenges, share some of the best practices. Peter, you seriously have put together this extraordinary effort in MS, and I know that you've addressed a lot of those challenges. And I think it's important for everyone to hear, you know, what you've been able to do in terms of bringing forward structured data that can help advance research.
So firstly, we had to look for where is the data, who's got data, and what type of data. So first of all, we did a big research on what's out there, who's got what, and in what state is it. Secondly, we also said we need to educate people. Education means power. If people are educated to share data, then they're much happier to do so, and also to collect it in a fashion that it can be used again.
I was comparing what you just said to my notes previously that were around kind of like the top 10 things that I would do. Yeah. And I think you laid out 3 that were so important right out the gate. Look at the types of data, who's collecting it, where does it exist, and identify those gaps. I know we're talking about gaps in real world data, but we also need to talk about gaps in what exists within our ecosystem. The second thing is you talk about creating awareness, right? Mm-hmm. Ensuring that those that are, you know, potential data stewards, data donors, right? Understand that you're here, what you're doing, you know, the purpose of what, you know, your area of focus is, et cetera. And then I think as part of that landscape, you also talked about data structure, which we know you've said it. I know this has been a huge part of your MS efforts is, you know, the little variances and nuances of the way the language that's used and the way data is collected can make it unusable. So the goal for us globally, right, is to ensure that we start building out standard data, and we can start even as individuals through that landscape process, right? Yeah,
no, definitely. It's a good point, Nicole. So firstly, like you said, we need to find out what's out there at the moment. Secondly, when you talk to people, talking is the first step, really, to find out people that have the same ideas that you do and they are willing to share, but they don't know how. Then it's okay, how do you register these things? And then you have a couple of different registries working together, thinking about how can we, you have the same data, but we call it differently. So then you're thinking, okay, what is the minimum data set we want to have? Because you can register, you have registries that are very specific in a certain topic, and others are very vast. But not everybody needs the vastness. Some people need only specifics, but all that data is out there. It's still usable. So we want to have what's called a minimum data set. So we sat down with a couple of big registries, say, okay, what is the minimum data set we need? And also talk to EMA, the European Medicines Agency, because they're also a partner that is really important to uphold. Real world data is not really used yet, unfortunately, because nowadays we have very good trials, but it's a very specific trial section, and then you only have that type of data, obviously, that's collected. But what if the person leaves the trial 10 years on? What does the medication do for that person? That's all lost, that info, and that's called real world data. So the data is collected either by an iPhone watch or some other means. But how can we register it? How can we keep it? And how can we use it again later on? So a minimal data set is one that is very important. And when we sat down with both EMA and different partners that have data, we came up with a 10-point data. And then people can still keep their own data the way they collected it beforehand. But we have to set up a mapping so that if you call a female an F and I call it female and somebody else is a picture, that's fine. But we need to map it. So that's the technical side of things. Yeah. So that sort of answer your question.
You said something that is so important, and I want to like frame it into kind of like a catchphrase. What's the most important is that we as patients, as we're collecting data, are collecting the right data. Correct. And that it is collected in a way that can be delivered at the right time to those that need it to advance efforts in the disease that you care about. So the right data at the right time is what is so critical. The second thing that you said that I think is really important, and if you were to tell, if we were to talk to the audience and talk about kind of some of the biggest gaps in collecting real world data, it's about the people. This isn't just about data. It's about the people that are involved sharing the data. And like you said, the ease of use and the ability to provide tools that allow for that real world data to be collected over time is going to be the key to this. Yeah. So it's for you, Peter, building trust, making it easy and streamlined for people to be able to be data collectors in their everyday versus having it be this overwhelming, like, you know, oh, I have to sit down and, you know, answer 500 questions. Now it's like, oh, it's collecting off of my Apple Watch or my iPhone. So I think that that's awesome. I think you and I are obviously believers that we all need to be responsible data stewards, that there's technology out there that's going to allow us to do that safely and securely, right? That you, like you and other organizations, you're trying to build in an ease of use and a way for people to participate. But I think what is really important, and I know that you've done a lot of work here, is, you know, sometimes it's as simple as, you know, little tiny teachings or overviews or educational tools that you might bring forward that help patient advocates feel or understand the value and the importance of being a data steward or a data sharer.
Trust is number one. So trusting people and that the data is safe is very, very important, because I feel people want to share data, but they don't even know that the data can be valuable. So if they don't know, they're not going to share it anyways. But if they know it's useful, then you have to convince them, let's say, that we can do that in a safe way.
I was just going to suggest a couple of tools, educational resources. So if you're in Europe, there's a really amazing educational series called Data Saves Lives that is available for patients. It was brought forward by the European Patient Forum. If you're in the US, this is also available globally, but there's a whole nother series that was brought forward by Global Genes called Data DIY, Data Do It Yourself. And in both instances, I think that those are great tools for those listening and those patient advocates that are looking at diving into, you know, this world of data collection to advanced research, that there are some tools out there, I think, that are very, very insightful and beneficial that could be used to help as you start thinking about your potential data collections.
So that's definitely one of our partners as well, the Data Saves Lives, because it's a very important body in Europe. And like you said, we have a similar one in the US, obviously. We're using different platforms again for collecting the data, so that people know where to find this data. Again, a European funded project. It's called the EMIF. The EMIF stands for the European Medical Information Framework, which is basically a catalog. It's where different diseases can post all their knowledge about what they have. So different registries are put in there for the different disease areas. We send them a Google Docs file, let's say, and just asking them, what do you have? So that's again the first research or the data mining landscape. Okay, what's out there? And then we put it in there for them. And it's easy for them to get access. It's a free platform, so they can find their way. If you as a researcher have to take time out to find that next to your normal day job, it's going to take you forever. But if that's done for you, it's going to really reduce the time and effort to do research. And that is a big bonus for the patients in the end.
That's awesome. So we've kind of moved from data collection from a patient perspective to now how to share that data, right? And
Correct.
That's another gap, right? So EMIF is a way that you kind of take data and put it in there to help support that ecosystem of discovery that we've been talking a lot
Correct.
about. Right?
Yeah. That's beautifully put.
Yeah. So that's one way to do that. And there's also new technology that exists that allows for data to become federated, meaning data, you don't have to copy and plant your data somewhere. It actually can stay where it exists, but it allows researchers, if you say, yes, I want to share my data, I want to federate my data, there's like these little bridges that are built out to the data. And researchers are allowed to go in and query across all those data sets without the data ever leaving. I think in the spirit of this is you need to ensure that you have the collaborative hat on, and that, in order to create process and forward movement in your disease, you have to collect the right data. It has to be structured in the right way. And you need to be a data sharer, right? We need to remove barriers to access to data, or we're never, ever going to see progress. Now there's technologies and platforms like EMIF and like some other federated data efforts. One of them happens to be at RareX, that will also allow global data sharing across data sets to break down those silos that we said have been an extraordinary roadblock and burden to progress. So I think this is awesome because, we've kind of moved from, the purpose and the way that patients can become active drivers and participants in research. And then now this new mindset, right? That in order to create progress, we have to share data. So whether you're a patient, an academic researcher, or industry, the mindset, the hat that we have to put on, the behavior change that has to happen is we got to break down those silos and those barriers. And now there's technologies and efforts out there that are supporting and enabling us to do that in greater ways. So I think that's extraordinary.
The only thing that I would like to say there is, for some people it's very scary, all this new information, the data highway and all this IT management and stuff. So education again there is very important. Because there's still regions out there that don't have a clear internet usage, or they don't know how to use a computer, etc., etc.
So, let's think about this really quick. So, let's say we are part of the audience today, and you're from a region that might not have access in country to a lot of the kind of very innovative technology. Because technically we are globally interlinked via the web, what would you suggest? What do you suggest, Peter, to MS patients that you want to collaborate with that are in regions that might not be as advanced, but the importance of having them become data participants? What would be your recommendation?
The European Multiple Sclerosis Platform, which is an umbrella organization for all the MS societies around Europe. So the European MS societies locally obviously have a better understanding of the MS patients in their country, also speak their language. What we try to do is, through educating the local MS societies, reaching out to the local patients again. So we're trying to really get close to them on their own level, to either become a member or to even open discussion groups, both online and offline, because as you just stated, some people, not everybody's online. I might have a Facebook page, but I've never used it. So all these things are important to reach out really locally. And it's not always easy, and you're always going to miss out on one or two, unfortunately, but the only thing you can do is try.
So, Peter, what are the perceived risks and inherent benefits of sharing data?
So the more data we have, obviously, everybody's thinking, oh, this is wonderful, this data. But what are the risks? Because patients are always afraid, oh, what's going to happen with my data? Maybe somebody will go and run away with it and make money from it. Or they're going to put it out on the web and everybody knows that I have this disease. People are worried about their mortgage going up. People are worried about losing their jobs because all of a sudden they know that they have this rare disease or disease. On the other hand, people on the one hand are very afraid, but then what I find out sometimes is that patients, after they go into the hospital for an MRI, they say, oh, it's my MRI. I don't want to show it to anybody through the doctors, but then they post it on Facebook all of a sudden, which is a bit weird. So we need to educate people on the fact that sharing data is fine, but through the right means. And the right means are through registries, through the MS Data Alliance, for instance, and through their HCPs. The risks that people face or that they perceive as a risk. Because I feel sharing my data can only benefit, maybe not me personally in the short term, but in the long term, the more people that share data, the more power. Because big data is really a novelty and can really, really work. Nicole, what about you in rare diseases? Is that kind of the same?
So when we talked about the perceived risk, we also talked about weighing the risks and benefits. And what we both agreed on was that the benefits far outweigh that small percentage of perceived risk, right? That we agreed, yes, there are some bad eggs, but there's tools and there's technologies and there's responsible platforms for data sharing out there that all help ensure that those risks are lessened, right? So what you and I wanted to focus on was really the inherent benefits in data sharing, right? Because it far, far outweighs not sharing. As we start bringing forward data and then have the ability to look across data, is we're looking at cross-disease research. You can also look at cross-disease drug development because there might be an MS drug or there might be a drug in a different neurological condition that could potentially be repurposed for you in MS. The ability to kind of share and look across diseases can accelerate a lot of discovery and future cures. And then the second thing is basket trials. There might be a symptom in MS that is related to other unrelated diseases, what we would have been perceived as unrelated diseases. And now what we call basket trials, we can look across the diseases and look across the symptoms or the phenotypes and start looking at identifying potential treatments for that symptom, regardless of disease. So there is a tremendous opportunity right now for us to accelerate future treatments, therapies, and cures with this notion of collecting and sharing data, the right data at the right time.
And Nicole, how can registries safely gather and share health data for research?
Most data collection efforts are built with governance and governing standards. In the US, you have governance like institutional review boards, meaning that data that's collected then will be approved and collected in the right way. We have HIPAA that mirrors GDPR overseas. I do think globally, these global standards are being recognized regardless of where you live or reside or collect data, because ultimately a lot of data sharing becomes global the second you open up a registry. So so if I was a patient looking to be a data contributor, I would just ensure that the data collection portals or registries have a very clear governance structure, and that they state that the data that's being collected is being mindful of GDPR or HIPAA and meeting those requirements. So that's on the data collection side. On the data sharing side, it's very similar. I do think there are technologies and governance that enables safe data sharing that keeps in mind the HIPAA and GDPR requirements. And so just do your research. Usually if you're looking to partner with a data collection platform or registry, they will make it very clear what their position is on data collection and data sharing. The last thing I'll say is around consent. What we want to do is create flexible consent that allows you to share your data responsibly and that it's used responsibly. But what we want to avoid are the silos that we've talked about for this entire session. And therefore, you want to ensure that the consent that you're signing on allows to be recontacted, allows you to share data within these governed principles.
Obviously, GDPR is a very, very important thing in Europe since 2 years now. Any registry basically wanting to use data and share data and collect data need to comply with GDPR. So that is just a first thing. So every patient can basically trust that if you go to a registry, first of all, they have to have a governance structure. So do your research, as Nicole said. Secondly, patients quite often have to find, if not always, write an informed consent saying that I confirm about my data being shared, but if I want to retract my data, I can also be forgotten. That's a very important one within GDPR. So your data has to be taken out again. Another thing is it has to be anonymized. So I cannot relate my data, my blood group, and my other things that they're collecting back to me as a person. So anonymization is a third one. If you have those three things, I feel as a patient very safe to share my data through a registry that has the best interest in doing so. What they will do, and that's another nice acronym, is called FAIR. They have findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable data. So data always has to conform in these four things.
And what do you see as dangers or potential risks for patients not wanting to share their health data?
The danger or potential risk of patients not wanting to share their data is basically that there's no advance, and that their own disease will not be cured, that they keep being sick and they get worse and worse. If you share data, that is the best and ultimate way to help find a cure for your disease. So you can only help yourself by sharing.
Nicole, do you want to build on this topic? If patients do not share their data, what would it mean for future patient treatment?
I think the danger and the risk of patients not wanting to share their health data is real. And I think, as we discussed, I think there's just an important need for education here to ensure that patients understand the importance and the value, that without it, we will not have future treatments and cures. I mean, you said it, Peter, so it's like pretty crystal clear. So either you contribute and you participate, or we likely, especially for some of the small diseases that we have in rare disease, you don't have a big universe of patients to tap. So it's not a nice to have to be a participant, it's a have to have in rare disease. So, if you want outcomes, you gotta play ball, as we say in the US.
So, over to you now. Peter and Nicole raised some really interesting points here. And now it's time to add your voice to the conversation with our group discussion questions. So the first question is, what do you see as dangers or potential risks for patients not wanting to share their health data? And the second question, how can registries safely gather health data within GDPR and share this data for research purposes? Peter, what tools has the MS Data Alliance developed to promote collaboration and real-world data generation?
So what we've done in the MS Data Alliance is having developed two things. One is called the MS Data Academy, and the other one is the MS DA Toolbox. Now, what are these two things? Firstly, the MS DA Academy is basically made up of three things. It's a consortium of different partners and stakeholders working together to educate not just patients, but also HCPs, educating neurologists, governments, any stakeholder basically interested in using real-world data for research and use in MS. So it's raising awareness. It's building a multi-stakeholder community. It's also promoting trustworthy and transparent information, like the FAIR we just discussed earlier on. The MSDA Toolbox, on the other hand, is the more IT organized bit. So how are we going to find this data? So that's cataloging that we spoke about before. It's developing standardized MS data dictionaries and data sets that we know, okay, these are the different things we definitely need to have, and that these things can communicate. So I can keep this in my own language in this setup, but I can use it for other people as well. And lastly, it has to be a federated data network that we can have group level queries on so that people can find it and access it easily.
Nicole, from your perspective, what are your key lessons learned from the 12 years of your experience working with rare diseases?
When we started on this journey, it was about love and hugs and trying to just wrap our arms around all the rare diseases and say, you're a community, we're one, we are one and we're together. And it's evolved so much because with rare diseases, in order to really accelerate treatments, like you have to be a stakeholder, a player, you have to be sitting at that table because you could potentially be the driver of some of this early research that will ultimately become the next treatment, therapy, or cure. The last two things I would say is also always wear that collaborator hat. Always look to partner where you can, because we will Sometimes collaborating is harder, as you have seen.
Oh, yeah.
But we will go farther if we do so, right? There'll be longevity, and we can tackle a lot more if we can be collaborators. Exactly. So for a lot of the leaders out there, you know, for you that are sitting here thinking about all this, right? You know, how can you sit and be someone that like kind of brings people along and helps, you know, ensure that, you know, arm in arm we can go forward. And then last but not least is this. Nothing ever goes as planned. No. There's always roadblocks. There's always hurdles. You have to make pivots. But if you put on that other hat, that's the problem-solving hat, and know that what will be a constant is change, and not being able, you know, your journey will evolve if you stay laser focused on what that vision and goal is. You know that you just need to problem solve along the way, and that has to become a standard. So those were kind of my lessons learned over the years, and I've applied it to not only building out patient advocacy orgs and helping others, but also now in this new effort around data collection. I think it's something that can be applied there as well.
As we're on the topic of sharing experience and insights, what would be your advice to other patient advocates on how to mobilize and convince different stakeholders to use real-world data?
The first steps to take in mobilizing stakeholders is talking, reaching out, finding a coalition of the willing, and really do a mapping, see who you can reach out to and talk to people and make sure that they are on board, and have a vision. Make sure your vision is clear, keep it short and simple, and make sure you don't use too many words. Just say, this is what we want to go for, and this is what the world will look like in 5 years. How can you convince them then? By showing them what's in it for me. For patients, easy. What's in it for you is we want to find you a cure for your disease. What's interesting for pharmacists and other researchers, you can write new papers. These are just some simple things, but you can really go down to, if you know somebody that has this disease, wouldn't you like to help him or her?
If people are sitting in the room right now thinking, what do I do first? Like, I think first it's a mindset, and you have to say, this is so important to me and the community that I represent that I'm in. I'm committed. So, and now it's also thinking about how to share that commitment to those others. That data sharing is our path to, or data collection and data sharing is our path to future treatments, therapies, and cures, period. And if you can get people on that bandwagon, the other stuff will follow. If we do this right as patients, we will help accelerate the process. We will save time and we will save money, which is why our job as patients collecting data is so critical, and why we become a more important participant and partner in drug development than we were in the future. So if we want to move forward faster, if we want to attract researchers and biopharma, we need to make sure that the data that we are collecting is usable, it's relevant, and it's right.
So over to you now, and thank you, Nicole and Peter. But what do you think? What are the first steps you can take to mobilize stakeholders to gather, share, and use real-world data? And how would you convince different stakeholders, such as pharma, healthcare professionals, patients, or governments, to actually use it? Please share your thoughts and ideas in your group discussion. So, Peter, Nicole, let's think about what the future could hold. What do you think effective data generation and management will look like 5 years from now? Where do you want it to be?
I'd like to see a world where real-world data is automatically shared by people. They don't have any issues with giving out their data, but they can also trust that the data is safe and will be used. So not that I just collect data for collecting it, but it's really used. And lastly, and that's a very important one, that I can see a benefit as a patient personally. That'd be lovely, of course. Now, I know that my data is not going to help me immediately, but it can help people in future. So even my kids would be beneficiaries.
So in rare disease, what I would love to see is data collection becomes a standard. With the tools and the technologies that we have, it becomes super easy for patients. and that it becomes a standard. And as a result of that, now we see transformative treatments, therapies, and cures. There's only 500 treatments for 9,000 rare diseases, right? We need 9,000 treatments for 9,000 diseases. What I hope we see in the future is that there's also this communication link back to patients that are sharing data, because the more that we know what we are contributing is making a difference, the more we will contribute. And that kind of flow of data and communication is what's going to be transformative the world over. Let's do this, people!
On behalf of the Roche Global Patient Partnership Team and the IEEPO External Advisory Committee, thank you very much for being with us today. In our discussion, Peter and Nicole focused on the responsible use of real-world data and how registries can help accelerate data research and remove barriers to patients sharing their data. Thank you to both of you. And if you'd like to learn more about Peter and Nicole or explore more resources, including the e-posters around this topic, then you can visit IEEPO.com and visit the Webisode section. Thank you.